Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, and my name's Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I hope you'll be interested in. If you have any reactions to the show, you can be sure to email me. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd like. If you do email me, I only ask that you include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm terrible about answering my email. But now, last week I said that this week is going to be all good stuff and lighthearted and whatnot, and I'm going to sort of have to break that promise because one reason is I didn't find a lot of good news this week. In fact, about the only good news I found was that Barack Obama has given the required 45-day notice to Congress of his intention to remove Cuba from the U.S.'s list of state sponsors of terrorism. I started to say, when I was originally doing this, that list that curiously enough that we ourselves were not on, until I remembered that we don't bother subcontracting our terrorism. Anyway, getting back to Cuba, it was designated a state sponsor of terrorism back in 1982, but the fact is it's been some time since the U.S. actually specifically referred to Cuba or actively accused it of supporting terrorism. Now, this whole thing is all part of an effort to reestablish normal relations, to normalize relations between the U.S. and Cuba, an effort that is long overdue, and which marks Obama's move in that direction as good news. Now, another bit of this actually isn't good news, okay? But it's surprising news, put it that way. It's just that I might, and I heavily emphasize the word might, agree with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie on something. He's proposed an income cap on Social Security benefits. He proposes that if you have non-Social Security income of at least $80,000 a year, your Social Security benefits start getting phased out until you reach $200,000 a year, again, in non-Social Security income, at which point you don't get any more benefits. Now, that certainly could help solidify benefits for the vast majority of us who don't make, $200,000, much less even $80,000 a year, by reducing the drawdown from the trust fund. But again, the key word there is could be help, and as always, the devil's in the details. Because there are some real potential downsides to this, one big one, is that and this, by the way, is the kind of reason why I'm wary of this. I'm willing to listen, but still wary of it. This would, admittedly in a minimal way, but it still would make Social Security, in a way, a means-tested program, which it has never been before. Once you cross that line, it becomes easier to talk about reducing benefits because then they are no longer geared to what you put into the system, but rather some argued about level of need. Another issue is the fact that Christie talked about the impact on younger taxpayers of Social Security benefits being paid to people who, I think pretty clearly, could get along without them. Thing is, that hints at the possibility that the proposal does not include reducing the benefits of the rich in order to protect the benefits of the rest, but reducing the benefits of the rich in order to justify cutting the Social Security tax rate, which could imperil the long-term stability of the trust fund by reducing the amount of money coming into it. In other words, this could be just another in the achingly long series of right-wing attempts to attack and to get rid of Social Security, attempts which actually quite literally date back to the very inception of the program. So, I'll listen. I will look at the fleshed-out details of this proposal. Maybe I'll be surprised. But the truth is, I remain quite suspicious, not only because history tells me to be suspicious, but because this proposal comes as a part of a PR campaign to portray Chris Christie as someone not afraid to ask the hard questions. And whenever a conservative starts talking about asking the hard questions, the answer almost invariably is screw the poor and the working class. And that is no surprise. So, all right, so I really didn't find any good news to talk about this week. I did find someone eligible for a Hero Award, so let's talk about that. The Hero Award is our occasional feature around here to acknowledge someone who, in some way, big or small, on an issue, big or small, in some way, this is a person who just at some moment did the right thing. So, now this one has actually gone a bit viral, or semi-viral if you like, so you may have already heard about this, but I wanted to mention it anyway. So our hero this time is Ashley Giron, or Giron. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but Ashley Giron. She's the owner of PB Jams. That's a restaurant in War Acres, Oklahoma, that specializes in varieties of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and other nut-based sandwiches. Recently, she noticed that someone had been rummaging through the restaurant's trash and taking out old, thrown-away food. Now, instead of calling the police or trying to come up with some kind of lockable trash bin, she posted a note. In fact, she posted several of them around the premises. Now, I know the image here. I know it's hard to read what that note says because of the reflections, but this is what it says. Okay? To the person going through our trash for their next meal, you're a human being and worth more than meal from a dumpster. Please come in during operating hours for a classic PB&J, fresh veggies, and a cup of water at no charge. No questions asked. Your friend, the owner. Now, Giron says that even though she knows that pride may well keep that person from coming in to take her up on the offer, she won't take the sign down until they do. And besides, she says a free meal is the least she can do for somebody down on their luck. In fact, she's already replaced the sign several times when one of them got damaged blown away by the wind or damaged by the rain or something. Now, in response to someone who made a comment on Facebook about this, telling her of a program at a pizzeria in Philadelphia, Giron has started a Pay It Forward program at the restaurant. Consumers can prepay for a meal for somebody after them in need who comes in. So far, about 50 meals have been paid for that way. And yeah, it's not much. Yeah, blah, blah. It's not really costing her anything since people are still paying for the meals. Yeah, cynical blather and huffing and puffing about it just for the publicity. Yeah, blah, blah. I don't care. It was a nice thing to do. It was a good thing to do. It was the right thing to do, which makes Ashley Giron a hero. Now, something else. Now, I'm doing this just for the fun of it. All right, just for the fun of it. And it's also from Oklahoma. The first week in April, a third-grade teacher at Woodrow Wilson Elementary School in Duncan, Oklahoma, was caught passing out Bibles to the students in her class. She announced to the class that she had the Holy Bible, and if anyone wanted one, they should just come up to her desk and take one. Like a third grader in Oklahoma is going to feel free to say no to something like that. Well, one student told his parents. They got in touch with the American Humanist Association, which threatened to sue the school. Remember, this is a public school. Threatened to sue the school if it didn't agree that, quoting the group's letter, school district and its agents must refrain from leading, authorizing, permitting, or condoning the distribution of Bibles. And this applied to on school premises from just before and during and just after school hours. On April 10th, the school reluctantly agreed, saying that, quoting again, the district understands that it has an obligation to follow the law set forth by our federal courts on this matter, which in fact, doesn't even actually admit that passing out Bibles in a public school is transparently unconstitutional, but it only just goes, grumble, grumble, okay, the courts have ruled that, grumble, grumble. That's actually made clearer by the fact that the school's attorney said in doing this that the district retains the right to allow the distribution of Bibles to secondary school students. Apparently because the AHA's letter only made reference to elementary and intermediate schools. Now that kind of thing, that strikes me as just incredibly, incredibly petulant and really pathetic. But that's not the fun part. This is what's the fun part. And I frankly wonder how much this had to do with the school's decision. In the wake of the news about the teacher giving out Bibles, an Oklahoma City group of Satanists wrote to the school saying they wanted their book included in the school as well. Adam Daniels, the leader of the group, said if they're going to allow a religious book from the Christian church, then they have to allow one from our church because we're on the same playing field. And after all, just like the right is always saying about issues like climate change or evolution, they're always saying, well, children should be exposed to all sides of this discussion. Don't we want to teach the controversy? Yeah, well, apparently not. Instead, KFOR News in Oklahoma City, in reporting on the Satanist letter, said, quoting, Daniel's church isn't the only Satanist organization that targets children. Now here's a question for you. When I, as a grade school child, was sent to catechism, do you think that there was a single person out there who referred to that as the Catholic Church targeting children? Nah, me neither. All right, last before the break. This is another reason I have to break my promise that the world this week would be a happy place. We have an RIP this week as another part of my childhood slips away. Percy Sledge has died of natural causes at his home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was 74. Now, if you're going, who was that? Or, I kind of recall the name, but I can't quite put something to it. Truth is, you may not know who he was, but you know this. When a man loves a woman, can't keep his mind on nothing, he'll change the world. Sledge started singing at local clubs with a group called the Esquires in 1965. The next year, Atlantic Records released a song that made his career. When a Man Loves a Woman has been called the definitive soul ballad, almost unbearably heartfelt, the ultimate makeout song, and a holy love hymn. Sledge said that the song, which was originally called Why Did You Leave Me, Baby, was inspired by a breakup with a former girlfriend who left him to pursue a modeling career after he lost his job. The tune, he said, was one that he used to hum to himself even as a child, even, he said, when I was picking and chopping cotton in the fields. He said, actually, he improvised the words one time when singing at a local college party. Now, in a fit of generosity, which he later called the worst decision I ever made in my life, he gave the songwriting credit to two of the Esquires who had helped him with a few of the chords. As a result, he never saw a single penny of songwriting royalties. Now, When a Man Loves a Woman was not his only hit. He charted about 5 other times, but it was by far his biggest. And even though the song has been covered by others, and in fact, Michael Bolton made a #1 hit out of it in 1991, it remains true that if ever one song and one singer were joined as one thing, this was that time. So, R.I.P. Percy Sledge. And we're taking a break. And we're back. We actually this week have a clown award. one of our regular weekly features, actually. Clown Award given for an act of meritorious stupidity. And this week, the big red nose goes to Robert Kennedy Jr., son of former Attorney General and former Senator Robert, or Bobby, Kennedy. Kennedy Jr. is one of those anti-vaxxers, as they're called, people who claim that there is a link between a vaccine preservative called thimerosal and autism, based on the presence of a mercury compound in the preservative. They claim this even though when you rely on actual studies instead of anecdotal evidence, the supposed relationship disappears, and the pharmaceutical industry hasn't used thimerosal in vaccines intended for like routine child vaccines for the last 14 years. Well, in a speech last week, Kennedy used the term Holocaust in reference to this imagined autism vaccine link. Now, some folks, as you might expect, were rather upset by that reference, and so on April 13th, he issued a statement saying, and I'm quoting it, "I want to apologize to all whom I offended by my use of the word Holocaust to describe the autism epidemic. I employed the term during an impromptu speech as I struggled to find an expression to convey the catastrophic tragedy of autism, which has now destroyed the lives of over 20 million children and shattered their families." Okay, we have two problems here. The first is that even though he did use the active form, I offended, rather than the passive, people who were offended, this is still a non-apology apology. It admits he defended some people, but never admits that what he did was offensive in and of itself. Instead, he tries to explain it all away as the impromptu result of a struggle to explain the catastrophe. The other problem here is his trouble with math. According to the current estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau, as of March 28, 2015, the United States had a total resident population of 320,590,000 people. People under 20 years of age made up 27.3% of those, so that the number of people under 20 is 87,521,000. So 20 million accounts to 22.9%, 23%, nearly a quarter of all of those under 20. So Robert Kennedy Jr. is claiming that nearly a quarter of everybody in the country under the age of 20 has autism. Now, according to the Centers for Disease Control, the actual rate of autism, or more exactly, the rate of autism spectrum disorders, is about 1 in 68, or about 1.5%. Which means that Kennedy's figure is actually more than 15 times the actual rate, which is certainly well into clown territory. Robert Kennedy Jr., failure at science, failure at math, an embarrassment to his father's memory, and a clown. All right, for the rest of the show now, I'm going to do something kind of different. Just going to be, I said last week, this is the 200th episode of Left Side of the Aisle. It's also almost exactly our 4th anniversary. It's almost exactly 4 years since the very first show of Left Side of the Aisle. So I wanted to spend some time talking about what has made that possible. Specifically, I wanted to talk about public access television. Because that's what you're watching now. You're watching me on TV, unless you're watching the YouTube version, but you're watching me on TV. But this is not just TV, this is special. This is public access TV. It's also called cable access, community television, lots of different names. It's also called PEG, PEG, public, educational, governmental, because a lot of systems which have these public access channels have those three, one for public use, one for educational use, one for governmental use. Thing is, whatever you call it, public access TV involves providing equipment, training, and airtime so that members of the general public can produce their own programs and get them out into that cable system for viewing by a wider audience. In fact, that's cable system and potentially well beyond. This show, Left Side of the Aisle, as far as I'm aware, is now seen on 4 different cable systems. 3 of them in Massachusetts, 1 of them in Idaho. Thank you, Idaho, for breaking me out of my geographical limitations. Those 4 systems have a combined viewer base that is very likely in excess of 50,000. Which means it's hypothetically, at least, it is hypothetically possible that this show could be seen in 50,000 households. Just some schlub can be doing it. What did Eric Burden call himself? An overfed, long-haired, leaping gnome is on television in 50,000 households. It's public access TV that makes that possible. So I want to give a brief history of how we, in terms of public access, came to this point. Now, public access TV, by the way, exists in several other countries besides the United States, but I'm going to talk about the history in the U.S. An interesting thing is that the idea of having somebody have a say, the subject of a documentary, having a say in that documentary and what it says and how it's done. The first time that was done, so far as anybody seems to know, was in 1922 in a documentary about an Inuit hunter that became called Nanook of the North. That idea about that the subject has a say in the product was an inspiration to a later generation of filmmakers. And it was in the 1960s and 1970s that the idea of public access TV really got going. Because in the 60s, cable TV was still a very new thing. It was a very new thing. And the operators of cable TV systems are often desperate for programming to fill the hours. So you had counterculture film cooperatives who took the idea of the underground press of unheard voices finding a way to be heard through other means than traditional ones. They took the idea of the underground press and they expanded it into television, and in an effort which became known as guerrilla television. They provided people with small portable cameras and other equipment and training so that those people could go out and film and do documentaries to tell their own stories in their own voices, plus often providing news coverage of demonstrations, strikes, other events that may well have had a different perspective and be told from a different angle than the regular news stories would be. According to one historian of the medium of TV in the U.S., public access in the U.S.'s largest media market, which is New York City, got started in 1968, conceived in 1968 by Fred Friendly. This is the guy, yes, it is the Fred Friendly, who had been the director of CBS News. At that time, he was an aide to Mayor John Lindsay of New York. His idea was the cable companies that had any agreements with the city would set aside 2 channels for public use that the public could lease for a nominal fee. Ultimately, even that idea of a fee got set aside. So in July 1970, New York City arranged for 2 companies that had franchises for cable access in New York. And they each set aside 2 channels, so there were actually 4 channels, 2 for use by the government, 2 for use by the general public. Public access programming on those systems began in July of 1971 with a potential audience of 80,000, which was the total subscriber base in Manhattan at that time, which shows you how much it's expanded. Groups quickly sprang up to promote this idea and to help people have the equipment and the skills in order to do their own programming. A breakthrough on this came in 1972. The FCC ruled that in the top 100 U.S. markets, cable operators had to provide 3 channels for public access and provide facilities and equipment to help people produce their own programming. They said, too, that, if there's not enough demand to justify 3 channels, okay, you can offer fewer, but you have to offer at least 1. In 1976, that order was expanded to cover all cable systems with at least 3,500 subscribers. Now, the cable industry, of course, didn't like this. It's affecting our profits and government regulations. So they sued, And unhappily, in 1979, the Supreme Court agreed with the industry that the FCC did not have the regulatory authority to make that rule. The thing is, by then, it was really too late for the industry. Cities and towns were reaching franchise agreements with the cable companies, which, as part of the contract, said that the companies had to provide this assistance and these channels. So it didn't matter what the FCC rule said. It was in the contract. Because in the early 1980s, cable was expanding very rapidly, and there was still it was a very competitive industry at the time. It wasn't like now that it's Verizon, Time Warner, or Comcast, and that's pretty much it. It was a competitive industry. So any city or town that said we're thinking of establishing a cable system could expect to be deluged with offers from cable companies to do this. And so they were in a position, the towns and so on, were in a position to say to the companies that, all right, if you want the contract, you have to agree to provide this. Plus, in 1984, I want to get the name right, the Cable Franchise Policy and Communications Act was passed by Congress, and that, in essence, gave back most of what the Supreme Court had taken away by empowering, making it clear that towns had the ability, had the authority to require these public channels and to collect franchise fees from those cable companies in order to provide the financial support for those channels. By the way, something I find interesting is that the primary author of this and the primary sponsor of this in the Senate, for those of us who are old enough to remember, was Barry Goldwater. Now, creating an access system like this required setting up a group to do it, which had to be arranged. Sometimes the city government itself did it, other times independent group. Sometimes the cable company itself did it. But the result of all of this is that the number of PEG channels has continued to grow. It still is growing. Over 1,500 cities, towns, and regions in the United States have these public access channels, total of about 5,000 channels over those 1,500 areas. You're watching one of those channels now. This is public access. This is for you. This is for us. Take advantage of it. I did. You should too. Do your own programs. Get involved. You can get the training, the equipment, the information, everything you need. Go look for it. That's what it's there for. Take advantage. I did. You should. That's it for this week. We'll see you back next week with our regular doom and gloom. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. Peace.